when you look at the construct of China's economy, you have youth unemployment somewhere between 20 and 40%. You have the real estate sector is in a serious state of decline. And that's what drove Chinese GDP over the last decade. And what she figured out is that runaway, or let's say rampant speculation in real estate, where in tier one cities, home prices got to be untenable and unreachable for the middle class. The people exiting university they're not marrying, they're not having sex, they're not having children, they're living in their parents' basement. So the fertility rate of women has collapsed, and China's got a real problem, and she figured that out a few years ago.
Yeah.
So anyone that believes the real estate sector is just going to turn around and head higher again is just wrong.
What do you make of all of these piecemeal stimulus type measures that have been announced? I mean, we're not going to get a big bang stimulus measure akin to the previous playbook, but they have announced peaceful measures to stimulate consumption, small tweaks in PBOC, liquidity operations, open market operations. Any of that going to make a difference?
You know, I don't think, though. I think they're stopgap measures. And, you know, I think what is lost on, let's say, the broad audience is the schizophrenia of the Chinese Communist Party with who runs the PBOC, right? We had Yi Gang in there, was fired in October when they humiliated Hu Jintao at the end of the 20th Party Congress. And then they rehired him quietly a few weeks later, and they just fired him again the first week of July. I mean, imagine if we or the Bank of England fired the governor and then rehired him and then fired him again and rehired him. Like, this shows you what's going on behind the scenes over there, and it's not as great as one would think it is.
You mentioned a few headwinds that are coming Xi Jinping's way. What do you think is most bothersome to him? What does he care most about? Is it the youth unemployment rate, which is running at a record high? Is it the property sector? Is it the general macro slowdown? Is it geopol?
Yeah, I mean, Xi Jinping is not economically focused. Economics are kind of a means to his end, very much like Putin. You know, when we talk about these autocratic leaders that really care, what do they care about? It's clear that Putin doesn't care about economics, or he would have never invaded Ukraine. Xi Jinping is focused on the reacquisition of Taiwan, and you can hear it in all of his speeches since 2017. We on this channel, on Wall Street, love to think about, well, they would never do that because that doesn't make economic sense. Well, we have to stop thinking that way. We have to start thinking and literally listening to what the man says. If you listen to what he says, I believe he will end up reacquiring Taiwan by force by the end of next year. And if that's the case, it's going to be very difficult for us as investors to kind of invest around that, right? That'll be a sharp shock to the world economy. And then what the US, the UK, and Europe will have to do is just improvise and quickly change what's already been going on, which is a slow decoupling.
What, based on listening to Xi Jinping, gives you the confidence that he will actually go after Taiwan in the next 12 to 18 months, and what's going to be the catalyst for it?
Yeah, so I gave a briefing at the Hudson Institute and the senior military leadership a few weeks ago, and I think about it in three buckets. I think about it on the force bucket, which, you know, I'm not a pure expert in military matters, but I've consulted with military leadership. They only have one more exercise to do before the Central Military Commission tells Xi they're ready to go, and that's an amphibious assault simulation. In the second bucket is what's China been doing on their mainland in preparation for a potential war. And we've all seen the new counterespionage law. We've all seen the way that they have changed their legal system to give Beijing the right or the legal ability to just foreclose on Western assets and detain expats just for simply complying with foreign sanctions. The new counter-foreign sanctions law happened in 2021. So if you just look at a timeline of what they're doing legally and what they're doing to build, let's say, air raid shelters in Fujian, or they're building combat hospitals, everything you'd expect them to be doing, they're actually doing. And just in the last 2 months, they're running marine diesel, SOEs running marine diesel refining at full tilt. When the economy's slowing down, well, what does that tell you? There's so many signals that all point in the same direction that, unfortunately, none of us want war. But I'm going to tell you, she's going to bring war to the West.
Okay, well, hopefully you're wrong.
Oh God, I hope I'm
wrong. Kyle, I mean, you are one of the most notable China hawks in the market. And you have criticized the U.S. government's approach to foreign policy, specifically when it comes to their dealings with China. Yellen was there a couple of weeks ago. That didn't go down too well. We saw your comments on our station in the U.S. What do you think the appropriate response should be out of the U.S. government and for U.S. companies? Because we're here on the show and we're talking about the likes of Qualcomm, Intel, Tesla. All of these are major U.S. companies that still derive a significant portion of their revenue from China. What should be done? You just cut them off completely?
It's a great question. Invariably, so many people will get it wrong if and when, let's say I am right, unfortunately. There'll be companies that lose PP&E. There'll be companies that lose revenue. Their supply chains will be really problematic. But I think when you think about foreign policy, we sit here in the UK. Imagine if there wasn't a Winston Churchill. What language would we be speaking today? What we learned back then through Lord Halifax and through Neville Chamberlain is appeasing autocratic madmen doesn't get you anywhere. In fact, it costs you more in the long run. And these are difficult decisions to be made. We are all in a world where we've enjoyed a peace dividend, let's say minus a few skirmishes with terrorists in terrorist nations. We haven't had major wars, really, since World War II. We did have Vietnam, we had Korea, but let's just say world wars. We all believe that era of the world was over with, especially when communism fell, when the wall fell in '89. Strength through weakness is the foreign policy the U.S. has adopted, and strength through weakness never works. We need to be more firm. I'm not saying immediately decouple and walk away, although I think that's what will happen. I'm thinking we need to be much stronger. Just today, we're expecting President Biden to release his outbound investment restrictions. We today, just like the US and the UK and Europe of the 1930s, it's been our money that has been building the military edifice and building these, let's just say the Chinese war machine has been built with U.S. and European money. We have to stop that. We have to stop. So when you ask what should be done, we should have very strict outbound restrictions on surveillance companies, on genomics companies, on any companies that deal with Chinese military building their aircraft carriers, their war machines, their ships, their tanks. Everything they're building, believe it or not, is being built with U.S. money right now.
Yeah. Both the Democrats and the Republicans in the U.S. are very open about their rhetoric against China, wanting to de-risk their relationship. But the approach has been very different from the Trump administration to the Biden administration. When you look back, now that we can reflect on the Trump years, which approach was actually more effective? And what can we learn in terms of policy moving forward?
I actually don't agree with the assertion that it's been very different. I mean, if you look at the Biden administration, they've done some good things. You've had, in the Trump administration, he's known as, quote, being tough on China. He wasn't ever really tough on China. It was his people in the National Security Council and the edifice below him. He fought changes with China, just like Steve Mnuchin did. So I think when we get to where we are today, the private sector, Jumana mentioned early, Intel and Qualcomm and the others, if we leave the national security of our countries up to the private sector, we'll all be speaking Chinese tomorrow. We need leadership. We need a Margaret Thatcher. We need a Winston Churchill. We need a Ronald Reagan. We need someone to stand up and say, this isn't going to happen anymore. We're going to be thinking longer term, not just about profitability, about the safety of our people and our way of life.
Kyle, I don't know if you've read the book Chip Wars, but it's one of the most impactful books I've read because it just really served to highlight to me that these future economic wars are actually going to be fought via semiconductors. And again, we have the likes of NVIDIA, these artificial intelligence chip makers that really are getting a lot of hype at the moment. And the U.S. in that respect seems to be ahead of China. Where do you think China stands in the race for semiconductors and these ultra high-tech semiconductors, the likes of which can be used for weapon military?
It's the arms race of the 21st century, right? The arms race is both nuclear and chips, but your point about it being chips is key. The way that I understand it is the reason we're pushing so hard on AI and quantum is if you get to a point where you can decrypt the most advanced encryption, meaning if you win the quantum race, you will own the data streams of the world. If you own the data streams of the world, you kind of, to your point, you own the world. and China's racing to that end. We are trying to race there with our allies, the UK and Europe, and trying to get there. And I think if you look back to October 7th of 2022 and what the Biden administration did with the CHIPS Act, if you read what they wrote, and they all believe that, that was a quantum leap, pardon the pun, in this fight for quantum supremacy. And also, kind of, if you think about Putin and Xi, you have China has a limitless partnership with the world's #1 war criminal today. And here we are on Wall Street saying, I can't wait to buy another Chinese stock. I think there's this dystopic relationship between investors and China. And I think at some point in time, we're going to wake up and realize that we've been at war with them for a long time. We just now realizing it. And Jumana made a point about the new war, the next war being a chip war. If you think about it, we're organized in the West with kinetic war departments that are, let's say, the best in the world, amongst the best in the world. The cyber war that we're fighting, which is different. We do have war departments for cyber, but we don't have an economic war department stood up in the UK, in Europe, or the West, or the US. And we don't have a data department, data war set up either. And China is winning those, every single day. And until we define them as who they are and treat them as who they are and realize that our two ideological, let's just say cultural underpinnings are really difficult to integrate with one another given the Chinese Communist Party. It's important to separate the 90 million people there from the other 1.3 billion because we're talking about the government, not the people.
Right.
And those are two different things because culturally they have a beautiful culture that lasts, millennia. But we need to get there.
Right.